Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I'm here to do a little review comparison of the Prima water-soluble oil pastels and the Faber Castell Gelatos. These are two products marketed to paper crafters and stampers, although they are art products and can be used for a variety of artistic purposes. But today I'm going to particularly look at them as a stamping product and how you can use them to ink your stamps, essentially. And so I've heard recommendations that you can use both of these products to color directly onto your stamp and stamp down, and I like it as a technique to create a lot of variation on a stamp. And so you can create blended colors right on your stamp and then stamp down without having to do any coloring. So I'm using a Waffle Flowers stamp set for this, and it's a succulent stamp here. And so what I'm doing is taking the Prima water-soluble oil pastels, scribbling some on, starting with a dark green and going into a yellow. This is a good color combination because it creates a lighter green in between. And the first way that I'm showing you can do this technique is by putting the color down and then spritzing it with some water. I wanted to experiment because a lot of people recommended this technique, but different people do it in different ways. And so I wanted to see which way is solidly the best and if it works better with the oil pastels or the gelatos, since both have been recommended for this technique. What I am noticing is that with the Prima water-soluble oil pastels, they are giving a really vibrant color, but if I spritz the stamp and then press it down, I'm finding two things happening. If I don't get enough water on it, it's not giving me a great impression. But if I get too much water, it's blending into itself and creating a less defined, more muddy image. And that's not what I'm looking for. And it's really hard to control how much water you are getting on the stamp. So one spray from a distress spray bottle was not enough. 2 sprays did a pretty decent job. But then 3 sprays was too much. So it's really hard to control, and then each spray bottle is going to be different, so it's not the recommended technique in my opinion. If I were going to stamp with them, I would not use the spritzing technique, although it would get the job done. That was the Prima water soluble oil pastels. Now I'm going to do the same technique with the gelatos in case there is a different result if they work a little bit better. So what I found was that I could scribble on the color same way. It goes on the stamp in a very similar way, except for that it's not as vibrant. So even though when you apply them direct to paper, which I'll show later in the video, they are equally vibrant direct to paper, when put on the stamp, they don't appear as vibrant, and when stamped down are not as vibrant. So I did 1 spray or 2 sprays, and they actually look very similar. And I will show this completed sampling at my blog and as well at the end of the video so you can kind of see it more closely. And I will try to bring it up to the camera a little bit more to show you as well. But I just wanted to kind of give you a complete comparison. So the spritzing technique on the colored stamp worked considerably better with the gelatos. However, it's just not as vibrant, and so I don't prefer it. I would prefer to use the oil pastels. So the next way that I wanted to try it was, what if the paper was wet? Because then the wetness on the paper would activate the pastels or the gelatos. Because basically these are both water activated products. The gelatos can be water activated to spread, and so of course are the water soluble oil pastels. So if the paper was wet, I wondered how that would affect it. I haven't seen a lot of people recommend it, and I can definitely see why, because when I do that, I find that it tends to sort of wick away from the stamped area or bleed out into the area around the stamp and sort of create this little like halo. It just looks really messy. I would definitely not recommend this method with either of them, although again, you'll notice immediately that the Primas are considerably more vibrant. For this technique of stamping with the stamping by scribbling the color onto the stamps, I definitely recommend the Primas over the gelatos. The gelatos do a lot of awesome things, and this is by no means an extensive comparison of the two. But in this case, you can see how this is considerably less vibrant. The Primas did not spread as much when I wet the paper. Now we are on to the next method of applying this stamping technique, which is to brush some clean water onto the colored stamp. So what I've done is, again, just scribbled that color onto the stamp from the green to the yellow to create that fade effect. Then I took a slightly damp brush and I wiped it over the stamp. If your brush is too wet and it wipes off a bunch of color, that's pretty obvious that you know, when you brush it over, the ink will come right off the stamp, or the pastel will come right off the stamp. So you'll know that it's not going to give you a good impression, and you should go back and try it again, which means to take it off and apply more color, because if you brush off too much, it's hard to apply again. So you don't want the brush too wet or too dry, but I feel like that's a little bit easier to control than the spray. So I definitely recommend this method for more consistent results, because when your result isn't going to turn out well, like if it's too wet or too dry, you can see that a little bit more clearly than with the spritzing method. And also you can test to see how wet your paintbrush is. You're not going to be able to sort of test to see how much water is coming out of your spray bottle. That's to me a lot harder to gauge. And even still, I found that the best one with the spritzing technique did not look as good as the ones with the brushing on method. This worked best for both of them. The best results for the gelatos and for the oil pastels was from the brushing on method, brushing clean water onto it. It gave the crispest image, it gave the most blended image. That was another key difference between the spritzing versus the brushing. When you do the brushing, the brush pulls a little bit of the color across the stamp and creates a more blended look, as opposed to the blending that you just get from scribbling it on. Because when you do, when you apply it, you can pull some of the green up by putting the yellow in that area. My last method, because I've been told that you can wet the gelatos or the oil pastels before using them, and I could see that being a fun way to use them on backgrounds. I thought, well, what if I wet the oil pastel or the gelato before I scribble it onto the stamp? And so that's what I did here. And I found that this gave hands down the worst result, in my opinion. It was too much water. The oil pastels in particular did not start sticking to the stamp after that, and so that was by and far the worst result for the oil pastels. And then when I did it with the Faber Castell Gelatos, I got a slightly better result, but again, it was kind of hard to tell like how much was too much water to put on them. And because you really can't, like, I mean, you could touch the gelato and feel how wet it is, but to me it was a little bit less intuitive than feeling a brush to see how wet it was. So while the gelatos did give a little bit better of a result on that, I wouldn't recommend that technique on either. If you want to stamp with oil pastels or gelatos, my recommendation is to scribble onto the stamp and then brush clean water across it. And so here you see, if I apply the oil pastels or the gelatos directly to this watercolor paper, which I'm using 140-pound Canson watercolor paper this entire time. If you apply the gelatos or the oil pastels right to the paper, they are equally as vibrant. However, when you use this water stamping technique, the oil pastels stay really vibrant. And so if you were wondering, what can I do with these oil pastels? How are they used? I would say this is one of the really awesome techniques with them. And again, these still pictures will be on my blog for you to take a closer look at, and you can be sure to subscribe to my channel for more reviews and card tutorials and stamping tutorials. Also, you can check me out on social media in the video description below. If you have any other questions about these two products, or if you want to leave some suggestions for what else you'd like to see, be sure to leave a comment, and thanks for watching. Bye.